Some African states have even succeeded with this, most notably Rwanda. Rwanda went from being the victim of one of the worst genocides in history to being the safest and most economically prosperous country on the continent. They did this because President Paul Kagame addressed the root cause of the country's suffering and made genuine efforts to bring it into the 21st century. The Rwandan Patriotic Front is a name you may have heard of. It was founded in 1987 by Tutsi refugees in Uganda, a minority ethnic group in Rwanda that had long persecuted the Hutu majority due to their elite status. In 1990, it sprang onto the world stage by returning home, invading northern Rwanda in an attempt to overthrow the Hutu-dominated government, sparking the Rwandan Civil War. Fighting lasted until 1993, when a ceasefire between the RPF and government forces was signed. But this ceasefire was short-lived, lasting less than a year and breaking down when then-President of Rwanda, Juvenal Habyarimana, was killed after his plane was shot down. What followed is one of the most shameful periods in human history, the Rwandan Genocide. Blaming the Tutsi rebels for the president's death, the government began encouraging the Hutu population to seek revenge. Over the period of just 2 months, it's estimated that somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million innocent Tutsis and moderate Hutus were systematically murdered on a scale not seen since the Holocaust. Leader of the RPF, Paul Kagame, had little choice but to resume the civil war in an attempt to end the killing. In July 1994, he was successful and managed to overthrow the tyrannical government, bringing the depravity to an end. However, Paul Kagame, now Vice President and Minister of Defense though de facto leader of the entire country, was concerned about the Hutus who had fled across the border to Zaire, and so officially Rwanda invaded the country with Ugandan help, with the aim of dismantling these refugee camps. But unofficially, Kagame had another aim. Neighbouring Zaire had been ruled since 1960 by a ruthless dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko, and Kagame sought to replace him with Laurent Désiré Kabila, someone who would be loyal to Rwandan interests. By 1997, almost all of Zaire had been taken over, and Mobutu was forced to flee to Morocco, allowing Kabila to seize power and change the country's name to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. During this time in Rwandan occupied territory, approximately 200,000 Hutu refugees went missing and are presumed to have been killed out of revenge for the genocide. As well as this, Rwanda's newly conquered territory held vast cobalt and diamond deposits, something which they covertly exploited by illegally exporting these resources home and selling it as Rwandan on the global market. This exploitation lasted until 2003, when the Second Congo War finally expelled Rwandan troops from the country. Paul Kagame, who oversaw the invasion and occupation, denies the claim that his troops illegally exploited the Congo's vast resources, saying that if it were proven, it would be taken very seriously. Kagame had been de facto leader of the country since the RPF took power in 1994, but became the official president in a landslide victory in 2000. Since then, Rwanda has become world famous for its immense economic growth, tripling its GDP from 2000 to 2013, and liberalizing its economy. But something less famous is how this progress was achieved. The Rwandan Patriotic Front is undeniably a party responsible for ending one of the worst atrocities ever committed. For that they must be applauded. Without Paul Kagame's leadership and the RPF's will to fight, the entire Tutsi people in Rwanda may not still exist today. The fact that the RPF saved Rwanda from depravity is exactly what they have used to hide behind. Since the end of the civil war in 1994, the RPF have held complete control over the Rwandan parliament and presidency, winning every election ever since in huge landslide victories. The lowest result they achieved during a chamber election was in 2003, with 73% of the vote. But more notably, the lowest they have ever achieved in a presidential election was in 2010, with 93%. Results like these are very rarely obtained with legitimacy. Often they come with asterisks, and Rwanda is no exception. Election results in Rwanda are not free and fair by any means. The reason Paul Kagame seems to be the most popular presidential candidate every time is because there is usually little choice. Those who wish to run in opposition are frequently barred from doing so by the National Electoral Commission. One such example occurred in 2017 when outspoken critic of Paul Kagame, Diane Rwigara, attempted to run against him. Just 72 hours after her campaign announcement, nude photos of her were leaked to the public. It was never proven who was the source of this leak. However, Rwigara firmly believes they were distributed in an attempt to humiliate her into withdrawing her candidacy. After she refused to succumb to this act of intimidation, the Electoral Commission declared her candidacy illegal, claiming required signatures she had collected in order to run were invalid, despite the fact that her followers, who had been tasked with collecting such signatures, were routinely harassed and jailed while attempting to do so. But still this did not deter her, and so the government had her arrested on false allegations of forgery and tax evasion, alongside her mother and her sister. After a year in jail, she was released on bail and later acquitted of all charges despite government protests. Diane Rwigara's story is typical of most who are perceived to threaten Kagame's grip on power, or even those who simply criticize his domestic policies. However, the tyranny of Kagame's government is not confined only to Rwanda, but even extends to the Rwandan diaspora living abroad. In November 2020, footage was leaked from the Rwandan embassy in the UK. In it, we can see approximately 30 people of Rwandan origin pledging an oath of allegiance to the RPF. The translation of what they're saying is roughly, "If I betray you or stray from the RPF's plans and intentions, I would be betraying all Rwandans and must be punished by hanging." An ex-advisor to Paul Kagame turned staunch critic, David Himbara, claims this was no one-off occurrence. In fact, he claimed it was routine around the world. Allegedly, Rwandans who had migrated abroad are expected to take these oaths of loyalty, wherever they may be. If they refuse, well, the oath itself makes it clear what would happen to them. But the punishment for disloyalty, as we saw in the case of Diane Rwigara, also extends to the family. Noel Zihabamwe, a Rwandan critic of the government who fled to Australia in 2006 to escape political repression, says that in September 2019, his two brothers, still living in the country, were taken off a bus by Rwandan authorities. They haven't been seen or heard from since. Noel Zihabamwe is convinced they are dead. The oath of allegiance and persecution of family members still in the country are tactics that would not be out of place in a country like North Korea. They are blatant attempts at instilling loyalty and, subsequently, fear in the Rwandan people, both at home and abroad. It sends the message that opposing the government, the RPF, or Paul Kagame is a game that will always end badly. For this reason, people like Diane Rwigara and Noel Zihabamwe must be applauded for their bravery. At the center of Rwanda's political nightmare is President Paul Kagame, someone who undoubtedly deserves the title of visionary. His economic policies have brought Rwanda onto the world stage as an industrialized powerhouse, and is the second best country in Africa to do business in. His anti-corruption policies have brought Rwanda to 51st place on the Corruption Perceptions Index, higher than many European countries like Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, or Greece. Because of his successes, his global image has become very positive. He's viewed by many abroad as the savior of Africa from poverty and corruption, and this plays right into his hand. Whenever the question of human rights is brought up to him, he can effectively deflect. Whenever Kagame is confronted with serious allegations of abuse or oppression, he denies them, claiming that whoever reported it is an enemy of Rwanda's prosperity. Because Rwanda has such low corruption and a booming economy, he can take the high road with regard to other African nations. He can call out other African leaders for corruption and economic mismanagement, even though his abuses of human rights are on a similar level. Paul Kagame is a special kind of evil, one that commits good deeds not because they are good, but in order to trick well-meaning people, like myself, into praising him, while stomping on the rights of others.
You know, it's always difficult to accuse me of anything and then say, prove yourself innocent. I think I want to turn it to you and say, prove me guilty.
Rwanda's de facto dictatorship is nowhere near as bad in terms of scale and brutality as other African nations such as Zimbabwe, Equatorial Guinea, or Eritrea. The economic growth it has experienced in recent years is nothing short of a miracle, and this fact is claimed by many, including the Rwandan government, to justify the authoritarian rule. They claim it could not have been achieved without it. But this isn't true, and we only have to look a few miles south to Botswana for evidence of this. Botswana is a functioning democracy, an exception on the continent, ranking 29th on the World Democracy Index. That's higher than 14 countries in the European Union, including Belgium. By the logic of Kagame apologists, this must mean their economy is nowhere near up to scratch, right? Well, no. In fact, Botswana's economy is in many ways even better than Rwanda's. On the Human Development Index, which measures life expectancy, education and per capita income, Botswana ranks 94th, lower than average but still 63 whole places higher than Rwanda. This shows that economic prosperity in Africa does not have to come at the price of freedom, but Kagame has succeeded in tricking the world to thinking it does. I shamefully fell for that trick, and many other well-meaning individuals still do. Until people begin to focus less on the money and more on the human beings, it will unfortunately continue.